Hello, and welcome to Talk Relationship to Me, the show that explores some of the most important relationship topics. I'm Dr. Elana Hoffman. As a clinical psychologist, I focus on all things relationships. From dating to sex to long-term relationships to divorce, I cover it all. I use my professional lens as a psychologist as well as lived experience to cover these topics. Do you need to talk relationships? You're in the right place. On today's episode, I am covering the Four Horsemen of the Relationship Apocalypse. So this is a really important topic in couples research and couples therapy. And this concept, the Four Horsemen of the Relationship Apocalypse, was developed by John and Julie Gottman in their research on couples, and they're big names in the couples world. A lot of people who are listening to this might be familiar with the Gottman approach. And so today I wanted to talk about the Four Horsemen because this is so important, and these are big predictors of disconnection and ultimately divorce. I talk a lot about what leads a relationship to fall apart, what leads to divorce or breaking up if you're not married, disconnection over time. I talk about this in my sessions. I talked about it in my book, So Your Wife Left You, Now What? If you're interested in that, if you're going through a divorce, that might be relevant for you. But the reason why I talk about this concept in a book about divorce is because I talk about what I see as a couples therapist in terms of what contributes to a relationship decline and what contributes to divorce. Now, the Four Horsemen it's not the only thing that contributes to divorce. There are lots of things that contribute to divorce, but this is one of them. This is an important one, and I think a really important one to talk about because it's just pretty ubiquitous. And to an extent, lots of couples really have all of these present, but it really depends on the degree and the severity. So today I'm going to talk about what these four horsemen are and how to spot them and what to do about it if you see it in your relationship. And I'm hoping with this that and this is my hope with a lot of these podcasts, is that it leads to introspection and understanding of yourself and your contribution to the dynamics in your relationship. And a lot of times people come to couples therapy saying, my partner is the problem. And they sort of think, whether it's conscious or not, they think that couples therapy is going to, quote unquote, fix their partner if their partner is the one that is the problem. And everything is a two-way street. And both people contribute to the dynamic in the relationship. So if you are somebody who is relationship minded, which I would hope that you are. If you're listening to a podcast on relationships, then you really can look inward and understand your own contribution to things. So as I'm going through these four horsemen, do think about, if any of these show up for you, if you do these things in your relationship. Of course, you're going to think about whether your partner does, but also think about it for you, if you do any of these things and what you can do about it. So the four horsemen are contempt, criticism, stonewalling, and defensiveness. So again, these are indicators of, problematic relationship dynamics that ultimately can lead to breaking up and divorce and general really unhappiness. So the first one I'm going to talk about is contempt. So according to researchers, this is the single biggest predictor of divorce. And it's actually pretty easy to spot contempt in a relationship and relationships that are contemptuous. I mean, the word contempt, means hate. It means you don't like your partner, basically. And there are signs of contempt that you can see pretty clearly in relationships. These are things like eye rolling at something that your partner says, mocking your partner, imitating your partner, and other behaviors that really signal this kind of intense dislike, even sometimes hatred, and definitely disrespect for your partner. I say this all the time in terms of, would you do these things for a colleague that you really respect, or a friend that you really care about, or your kid? If they make a joke, would you roll your eyes? Would you mock them? Would you tell them that their interests are dumb or unimportant? No, you would not, at least not without some serious consequences. And those consequences stand in relationships too. So if you are finding yourself rolling your eyes at your partner a lot, mocking your partner a lot, just generally really not taking them seriously, not respecting them, these are indicators that you don't really like your partner. And this high levels of this really lead to big problems. I mean, even low levels of it lead to big problems. Nobody wants their partner to roll their eyes at them when they say something or when they express an interest or when they reach out to them or, anything like that. So that is contempt. And again, it's pretty easy to spot, and I always say to watch reality TV or shows about relationships to be able to look at these things. And, I bet you would be able to see these kinds of contemptuous signs if you are really starting to look for them. So think about that for yourself, for your own relationships. And again, it is a bad sign. Criticism. So this one is pretty common, and people kind of tend to think that this is okay in relationships. This can show up in a lot of different ways. They can show up as direct insults or really like abusive language, telling someone you're putting someone down, telling someone you're dumb or you're stupid or you're a bad driver, or you're a bad parent, all these things that are like abusive, that are emotionally abusive. But they also can show up in a lot more subtle ways, this criticism. So for example, you're packing this for our kids' lunch. You forgot XYZ in this kind of tone. Like, why are you taking this out for dinner? Just let me do it. It's faster. You loaded the dishwasher that way. You forgot the tomatoes again. All of these things are criticism, even though people will come into my office and they'll say, well, he did forget the tomatoes. And that is pretty bad, frankly. It makes people feel stupid. It makes people feel really bad about themselves. It erodes at their confidence and esteem. And if you are in a relationship where legitimately you are in a loving, safe, secure partnership, of course you can tell your partner, hey, next, you forgot the tomatoes in a loving way that is not critical. But when you have high levels of these four horsemen, comments like that, when said in a specific tone and are actually meant to be critical, even though someone would say that they're not meant to be critical, then that is highly problematic, and again, people sort of brush it off as, you're sort of joking or, oh, all couples kind of do this. That is not true. The couples that are unhappy and have high levels of these four horsemen do it. But criticism is not a given in relationships. And this is kind of the biggest one that I see sort of quote unquote normalized, that everybody says this, everybody criticizes their partner. Again, maybe for your examples of relationships, if you grew up in a dysfunctional household with a dysfunctional relationship as an example, and you saw this all the time, then yes, that is quote unquote normal for you. But that is not a healthy, happy, secure relationship with a lot of criticism that is sort of veiled as kind of joking or veiled as normal. It is not, and over time can really cause low self-esteem, low confidence, lots of disconnection, resentment, and all kinds of things that are not good for the relationship. So if you are listening to this again and you think that that is you, really think about that. Think about the next time you want to, quote unquote, help your partner, remind them of something, in this way that is not actually from a place of warmth and love, then maybe think about that. Maybe don't say that. Maybe don't say it. Maybe reframe it in a way. Maybe it doesn't matter if you forgot the tomatoes, because ultimately it actually doesn't. It actually doesn't matter. Or load the dishwasher in a certain way or what have you, right? These things tend to be a bigger deal when you are already in this really unhealthy place. And I sort of have more to say on that, but I will leave that for now. That is criticism, and it is a big problem. The third one is stonewalling. So stonewalling is basically shutting down, refusing to engage in a conversation. This can show up by literally walking away, turning over in bed, stopping to talk. Sometimes people even say, I'm not talking about this anymore. This is often the result of feeling really so emotionally overwhelmed that you can't really engage in a conversation. This also has to do with attachment. A lot of people who have avoidant attachment really sort of withdraw and can stonewall in this way. It's okay to withdraw sometimes. It is okay if you need some space. It's okay if you need some time. You have to be able to communicate that in an effective way. Of course, couples therapy can help with that. Withdrawing in itself is not necessarily a bad thing, but stonewalling in this way of being totally inaccessible. I mean, think about a stone wall. That is, of course, where this is named. You can't get through. You can't penetrate, right? And it can be incredibly damaging for a partner who wants to connect and talk. And of course, this partner often has anxious attachment and pursues in the face of withdrawing. And again, couples therapy can really change this pursuer withdrawer dynamic that if it is in a really unhealthy place. But stonewalling is a very sort of mean, aggressive or passive aggressive way of shutting down a conversation and just really closing off communication. And oftentimes when people stonewall, they don't kind of come back to it in a way that is healthy. Again, you can withdraw and you can say, hey, I'm overwhelmed and I just need a moment to think about this, and then you can come back and talk about it. That's not stonewalling. Stonewalling is, just effectively shutting down any kind of communication or conversation, and it can be really damaging and kind of crazy making. And this is the kind of thing where then people will come back and talk about their crazy partner because then their partner really escalates, but it's often in the face of stonewalling. So on the outside, it seems like that partner who stonewalls is kind of the calmer one, but it really is very damaging to a relationship. It's basically saying, I don't care what you have to say. Your feelings don't matter. And that is obviously very damaging. So the last one is defensiveness. And this is also really tricky and incredibly common. And like criticism, many people really don't realize that they're being that they're being defensive. Defensiveness is basically just like a lack of accountability for something. And it is often an automatic not wanting to hear what your partner has to say and just jumping to defend, right? You want to say your piece, you want to explain, and that's fine, but there's got to be space for that. You have to hear what your partner is saying, and if you jump to defend yourself, you are not actually hearing what your partner has to say. You cannot actually empathize and validate what they're saying if you are just sort of waiting to talk and waiting to say your side. So for example, husband tells wife, you forgot about my work happy hour. I was really hoping you'd make it to. Wife responds, don't you know how busy I am? There are happy hours all the time. This one's not a big deal. You forgot to remind me, and so on. And this can escalate. And so, wife in that situation could have said, oh, shoot, you're right. I forgot about this. I'm really sorry. That must be disappointing for you. And then probably in that moment, husband would say, hey, no problem. I know you have a lot going on. I probably should have reminded you. No big deal, right? But initially, her response is a very defensive one. And a lot of times, defensiveness comes from really shame, a place of not being able to kind of own mistakes and being accountable, and it not really being like okay to be human and make mistakes, And again, this often comes back to family of origin. If you grew up in a household where you did not see your parents taking accountability, if they didn't take accountability for what they said or what they did, even if things are not intentional. I mean, in this fictional example, that is probably not fictional, she did not intentionally forget, although, sometimes if things are really off the rails in a relationship and you are really in a really bad place, this can be a passive aggressive thing. But let's just assume the best for the moment that this was not on purpose. But if you're somebody who has a hard time just admitting that you made a mistake, that you are human and you are a fallible human, as we all are, then a lot of shame comes up and you feel like you cannot acknowledge, oh yeah, I dropped the ball on this. Again, even if it wasn't intentional, you can say, oh, this must have hurt your feelings, right? And this really, a lack of that really shows up in a lot of defensiveness. So this is a big deal, defensiveness. They all are. All of these four horsemen, if you have these in spades, if you are listening to this and you think there's a lot of contempt, a lot of criticism, a lot of stonewalling, a lot of defensiveness, then I really encourage you, again, to potentially seek couples therapy or relationship coaching or individual therapy or coaching to understand your own contributions to things. A lot of people come to me because their partners don't want to come to couples therapy, and that is okay. You can't force it. You really cannot. But if you change, if you build awareness and introspection and you yourself are open and you're not defensive and you can sort of understand that you are also a human who makes mistakes and contributes to the dynamic of the relationship, then you understanding that and you changing can change the dynamic of the relationship. So really people say, my relationship is fucked because my partner won't come to couples therapy. That is not true. It's really not. I have seen relationships change in many ways when one partner changes. So, again, if you are hearing this, you are probably relationship minded because you are listening to a podcast on relationships. So think about your own contribution to this and really, even just throughout the day, kind of just recognize, oh, that was defensiveness. Oh, that was criticism. I didn't actually really need to talk about how my partner loaded the dishwasher or forgot to put my kid's coat on or whatever it is, right? And just think about how this shows up for you. Pay attention to your partner's response to it and really introspect. And, you don't have to say something about that thing most of the time. Like 90% of the time, maybe even 95% of the time, it really doesn't matter. Your relationship is more important than the way the dishwasher is loaded or that, your partner didn't put the right coat on your kid. And all of these things put together really affect the closeness and the connection of your relationship. And so that is more important. So think about that. This is, an overview of the Four Horsemen. There's lots of stuff out there on that, but I hope that today was helpful in having you think about your own relationship and specifically your contributions to these dynamics if they are relevant for you. This has been Talk Relationship to Me. I'm Dr. Elana Hoffman. Do you have a question about relationships? I'd love to hear from you. Go to my website, drelanahoffman.com, and click contact, or find me on Instagram at dr.elanahoffman. You can find all the info you need, including more about today's episode with links in the show description. And if you have questions or comments about today's episode, I would love to hear from you. You could inspire a podcast topic. Till next time, I will leave you with, there's probably a lot of defensiveness in places that you don't realize. So take a look at your own contributions. Okay, till next time.